I'm very excited to be with you all today and to have a conversation that's quite befitting for the month of January, named, you might recall, for the Roman god Janus, not the god of sub-zero weather, but the god of beginnings, the god of transitions, the god of choices, the god characteristically depicted with two faces, one facing backward over the past and what has happened, and one looking forward over what is yet to come. You similarly are on one hand, as Don said, celebrating 40 years of a most distinguished history of work, and at the same time are looking forward to some quite remarkable, dare I say, groundbreaking, pioneering, even the cliche paradigm-shifting plans to reinvent the Donors Forum, or taking after our rock star prince, the regional association formerly known as Donors Forum. As I've talked with Valerie and more recently my fellow respondents today, it's become clear to me that the potential impact of the innovation and the change that's emerging here in Chicago, in the region, and in the state of Illinois holds tremendous promise, not only for our practice, but for our communities, and for all the children, families, and individuals and institutions that we try so hard to help and to create the positive change that benefits all. But what is the old adage, if it's not broke, don't fix it? Well, I don't want to get drawn into that argument, but I think many of us would agree that what is broke, or at least seriously underperforming for far too many people, are our educational and talent development system, our social service and safety net system, our health care, and sometimes called wellness system, and even our financial and economic and job development system, to name just a few. But perhaps more importantly, underlying all these systems are the challenges and the troublesome condition of our traditional public problem-solving system that in our proud and aging democracy seems to be unraveling. And many have observed in recent times, times of rising inequality and falling social mobility, that the wicked problems like these that we face will require an unprecedented and complete collaboration of all three sectors that uniquely characterize the landscape in modern American society. The private sector with its corporate and commercial interests, the public sector with its multi-level and layered governmental entities, and the third sector, our independent sector, with its nonprofit practitioners, our NGOs and CBOs, its foundations and institutional investors, its individual donors and philanthropists, its donor advisors, and its advisors to donors. Now, getting any one of these three sectors alone to act in concert, in alignment across competitive, jurisdictional, and bureaucratic boundaries would be a daunting task in itself. But even harder would be to not only forge that internal intra-sector alignment, but to then stand on that platform, Archimedes-like, and dare to catalyze true and endurable three-sector collaboration. Foolhardy? Perhaps. Necessary? Absolutely. And that's the challenge that I believe the Donors Forum has or is about to embrace. After many years of steady and adaptive evolution, you stand on the threshold of a new era, to go where no regional association of grant makers has ever gone before, and to instigate a revolution in how local, regional, and statewide public problem solving in the 21st century is newly conceived and can be newly executed. I have only one question. Are you completely out of your minds? Hopefully, yes. I think that's what it will take to really tackle the challenges facing our country. So let me be like Mark Antony at the funeral of Julius Caesar and say, I come to bury Donors Forum, not to praise it. Now, why is paradigm shifting so easy to say and so hard to do? When Thomas Kuhn's coined the phrase in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, he made the keen observation that it's not the young Turks who are challenging the old traditions, but it tends to be the veterans, the supposedly wise elders who have lived for so long within the boundaries of the reigning paradigm, they become frustrated, fed up, and increasingly strident in pointing out a growing number of essential things that the dominant practice does not explain and does so inadequately address. So I salute first the veterans here of the Regional Association, formerly known as Donors Forum, and then I hope you'll come up with a new name. Maybe the initials are DF. And then I'll also praise those who push them or egg them on in transforming this organization so that it might provide a new connecting, centripetal force within our independent sector that could indeed be a catalyst for true three-sector collective action. So let's look not only at the trends in our own social sector, but consider briefly how forces in the private sector and the global economy, and how forces shaping government and the public sector might in fact be converging in a way that could support and take flight with whatever phoenix that might rise from the ashes of the once great donors-only forum. In such a bold undertaking, who must take the lead, and what will it actually take? Starting with foundations, we must challenge the inherent and historical constraints of what we call organized philanthropy if we are to adopt practices to face the social challenges of our time. Socrates counseled us to know thyself, and in this I often find it useful to recall what Valdemar Nielsen, one of the greatest observers and critics of American philanthropy, had to say in his introduction of his book, The Big Foundations. He wrote, "In the great jungle of American democracy and capitalism, there is no more strange or improbable creature as the private foundation. Private foundations are virtually a denial of basic premises, aristocratic institutions living on the privileges and indulgence of an egalitarian society. Aggregations of private wealth which, contrary to the proclaimed instincts of an economic man, have been conveyed to public purposes. Like the giraffe, they could not possibly exist, but they do." Now, Nielsen's choice of the giraffe as our mascot or metaphor may be more appropriate than he actually intended for at least three reasons. Consider, first of all, that giraffes always seem to be looking down on you. Second, if they so much as look in your direction, they think they're sticking their necks out. And of course, they couldn't be more ill-equipped to become our true, authentic, and credible partners at the grassroots level. I hope someday that we private foundations will have sufficiently altered our behaviors that we might be able to adopt a more appropriate mascot. And your suggestions are welcome. Of course, Dwight McDonald put it a lot more simply than Nielsen when he said a foundation is nothing more than a pile of money completely surrounded by people who want some. Of course, community foundations are designed to be completely surrounded by another group of people who want to put it in. But there's no question that you have before you a historical opportunity. Today, reflecting on over 2 decades of what we call venture philanthropy, and seeing the continued waves of new philanthropists in our communities coming onto the scene every day, I hope by now the supposed false dichotomy of old and new philanthropy has been shown to be not only false, but an obstruction and a smokescreen that obscures what we know to be the case. That is, when investors in social progress share common goals and interests, be they long-standing and well-established foundations or brand-new philanthropists, be they large or small foundations, be they donor advisors or advisors to donors, they all typically and consistently start by seeking out the best practices and the best practitioners among funders and nonprofit leaders to learn from, to partner with, and to build upon the efforts and innovations of yesterday and today. In many senses, like politics, all giving is local. For our nonprofit partners, the allies and practitioners that give life to the inanimate financial resources of foundations, we cannot for much longer deny their constant call for a fundamental transformation in the relationships to funders, both private and public, and the underlying financing mechanisms that too often hobble their best efforts at mission-driven enterprises. My nonprofit allies often say that running a nonprofit is like trying to drive across the country in a car with a 1-gallon gas tank. And of course, if the funders who help pay for the gas choose to ride along, it can be the carpool from hell. But what we are coming to acknowledge in the most dramatic details, provided through the lens and shared insights that a geographical focus like Chicago and the region that emanates from here all the way to the boundaries of Illinois, is the total lack of what Adam Smith brilliantly described in the private sector as the invisible hand. So the question is, could a new kind of regional association that is truly third sector wide and inclusive begin to shape and draw the outlines of a visible hand that helps create the integrated impact of many independent but now consciously interdependent actors in this city, this region, and this state? Now, turning to our partners in the private sector, we see similar positive developments where corporate leaders are also questioning the wisdom of over-reliance on the invisible hand of markets. Organizers of the B Team initiative, led by a group of corporate and international CEOs, including Richard Branson of Virgin Atlantic, are calling out to their fellow captains of industry to strive to change their businesses so that people, planet, and profit are equally pursued under the guise of the rules of capitalism. Their mission is to catalyze a better way of doing business for the well-being of people and the planet. But to make capitalism more conscious and conscientious, they'll need all the support we can lend them through our own private consumer choices and our public choices as citizens. Now, for our partners in government, the time could not be better for philanthropy through its regional associations to double down on our historical emphasis on place. First, because the rising generic mistrust of government can only be reversed when we ourselves call our face-to-face allies here in local, regional, and state government, call them civil servants, not bureaucrats. And second, everywhere we now read about the new urbanism. International conferences proclaim it will be the big cities and regions, and not the nation-state, that will stimulate faster-paced innovation in adopting new processes, new structures of shared governance, and new hybrids that take seriously the local dynamics between local community and regional networks, and take advantage of the creative interplay and the differences between community and networks. This geopolitical trend back to city-states resonates with the reminders that we consistently get in our own philanthropic trade journals and reports. That is, that place matters, that relationships matter, and that long-term goals frameworks are important, that they outlast initiatives and election cycles. This notion that the appropriate scale and context for social change revolves around the dynamics inherent in the relationships of states to their regional and local levels was most recently called out in a new report just published by the Urban Institute on the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty. The report's entitled Addressing Deep and Persistent Poverty, a Framework for Philanthropic Planning and Investment. In this wide-ranging analysis of all that has been done and where funders and social actors might go next, the authors offer solid advice for those that would continue the anti-poverty effort. And of course, among their recommendations to foundations and social actors, collaborate broadly, collaborate with government, and, quote, consider work at the state level. But I must ask again, who will lead this movement? The great irony of foundations is that while we have no customers demanding better products and services, no shareholders waiting for our quarterly annual reports, and no competitors threatening to put us out of business, we are completely free to take risks and try new things, reinvent a regional association. But the same reasons and the same conditions also make us free not to. In 2005, when the Packard Foundation and the Kellogg Foundation hired some futurists at the Monitor Institute to take a look at the dramatic changes happening in the world and ask how this might inform the future of philanthropic practice, the report entitled Looking Out for the Future by Catherine Fulton and Andrew Blau was full of great advice. One of their key observations was that while philanthropy today works in an increasingly interconnected environment, it still conceptualizes its role according to a long history of independent action. That, in fact, they observed, is the new paradox of modern philanthropy. The scarcity of connections of many types in a more powerfully connected age. Changing that, they wrote, will require letting go of some of the most precious assumptions of recent years, especially around the meaning of strategy. The strategy literature, they observed, borrowed from business and sometimes from the military, has at its core the presumption of success in competition. But the philanthropist's goal isn't victory over others, and strategies imported from competitive industries that focus on identifying and exploiting a niche must be adapted to an environment where differentiation may be more of a liability than an advantage. In other words, they wrote, rather than seeking competitive advantage, philanthropists should develop their cooperative advantage, the advantage that comes uniquely from working in concert with others, developing the capacities to harness resources beyond any single institution, and applying them to complex problems. A recipe for a truly integrated and inclusive regional association. Now combine this advice with the observations of Michael Porter of the Harvard Business School when he writes that the advantages in a global economy lie increasingly in local things, knowledge, relationships, and motivation that distant rivals cannot match. And author Jacob Rubin extends this thinking, noting that, quote, when applied to the realm of social innovation, clusters describe the confluence of funders, visionaries, organizations, artists, and academics who share a passion for innovation around a particular theme. When grouped this way, they take advantage of the school of fish effect. They become more influential, visible, adaptive, and capable of rapid response to changes in their environment. Rubin goes on to say, precisely because so many of the world's problems now arise from the poor design, governance, and mismanagement of cities, it is imperative that we learn to transform our cities into centers of the world's solutions. This brings the issue of urban strategy into focus. Urban strategy is a practice not only for political leaders, planners, and builders of cities, but also for industries, corporations, civil society organizations, and governments that build their advantage in cities and depend on them. And finally, he says, urban strategy also addresses the larger question of how to develop the city into a more stable system, politically, economically, and ecologically, and how that system can increase equity, inclusiveness, sustainability, and resilience in the world. Standing here today in Chicago, it's clear that all the signs are calling for leaders and social actors to reach across their communities, their interests, across geographies and across sectors, to forge more durable, interconnected frameworks and the cultures of collaboration to sustain them. Finding new ways to work is not an option. It is an imperative. And it strikes at the heart of how we define ourselves, our institutions, and how we come to redefine what success itself is. With so much history, so much momentum and promise in this 21st century city, it would seem that the Regional Association, formerly known as Donors Forum, is poised to be the change it seeks for all the community. I can tell you, the whole world, or at least the whole philanthropic world, is watching. Thank you.